Alrighty, I have 5 minutes on the clock. Opponent, are you ready?
I am.
Wonderful. Audience, are you ready? Woo. And judges, you are. Well, then I'll begin now. Alright, I have a lot to get through, so blanket round of thank yous to everybody here today. With that, I'm going to go into what we're debating here today. So, some quick refutations of his arguments. So, he talks about cable news. He says vital means necessary, therefore, all of the particular sources he used don't come from cable news, therefore my point is invalid. Use whatever word you want to use. It'd be extremely difficult to have this sort of function going on today if we don't have cable news sources. As one of my people on my team here pointed out when we were preparing for this debate, is that only 2 rounds earlier, my opponent here quoted Fox News in a debate. Okay, the point of the matter is not that it's impossible to not use cable news for these sort of debates. Instead, what I'm pointing out is that it's really difficult to. So that's all I'm talking about in my first contention. Next, he talks about the press encompasses everything. Therefore, we should throw out what I'm talking about with cable news and the press. The reason I'm talking about cable news is because it's a massive part of the press. Like a massive, massive percentage. As Pew Research points out from 2021, 71% of people get their news from cable news and online providers who cable news goes through. So the fact of the matter is it is included as part of the press. Because cable news is considered some of the most professional institutions for journalism, my points do stand there because it is part of the fourth estate. And so I think my arguments do flow in this round because of that. So he talked about how, at my third contention, he argued for my third contention, the Federal Communications Commission goes through broadband, therefore my point should be thrown out. My point was that the broadband is facilitated by people being able to see it on cable news networks. Like, they can't see the radio waves. They have to actually watch it somewhere, and they're watching it on cable news networks. So my third point does stand because of that. Lastly, going over his ultimate arguments, he says polarization. He's like, you're right, it doesn't cause it, it inflames it. Well, the question of the matter is this. Is that what we sort of thought he was talking about in his first contention, in his first speech? He seemed to be implying in his first speech that polarization was caused by cable news networks instead of just being inflamed. But either way, it really doesn't matter because at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves the question, if we didn't have cable news networks, what would be going on? Really, like if 71% of people are getting the majority of their news from cable news, and we take that away just as a thought exercise, what would happen? Well, people wouldn't be literate to the news. And that goes back to our value criteria for today, ladies and gentlemen. Our value criteria for today is democracy. What's best for democracy? I'm not telling you that polarization is good. I'm not telling you that cable news networks can't improve on things. I'm not telling you even that it's impossible to do debate here without cable news. What I am saying, however, is that without cable news, it's very hard for the American people themselves to be informed at all of what's going on in our country. Okay? He talks about negative news on cable news networks. The fact of the matter is that the reason cable news networks report mostly negative news is because that's the important stuff. Like, ultimately, that is the important stuff. You want to know where the bad weather's coming from. You want to know about dangerous parts of the city. You want to know about food shortages, about inflation. You want to know about those things because those things affect your daily life in a very impactful way because you have to make decisions on those things. So it's not that I just want to have negative news. The fact of the matter is they're reporting on the most important news. And the most important news, unfortunately, a lot of the time is negative. So if this really is, if this is our value criteria for today, and he hasn't refuted that, so that's what we're going off of, is that what is best for democracy here when we're weighing this round of on balance. We have to consider the fact that cable news, because the majority of people get their news from cable news, is necessary to our democracy. It's how people stay informed. It's how people make informed decisions about what's going on in the world. And lastly, to address his contention about mental health, the reason I didn't get to address it is because I ran out of time. When we talk about mental health, we have to realize that mental health is impacted by many factors, one of which of them being social media. Like, everyone knows this, you have social media, is that you have to be very careful how you use it. It's not that cable news is the sole cause or even the majority cause of mental health crisis in our country. Notice we didn't start to see this uptick until social media came along and was being used in large numbers. So really, if we're going to talk about mental health, sure, mental health can be impacted by many things, but I don't think we should put all that blame on cable news when the fact of the matter is that we haven't even talked about social media at all. So for all these reasons, because it is vital to our democracy, most of all, I urge you to vote for the negation in this round. Thank you.
Judges ready? Yep. Opponent ready? Ready to get out of here? Make some fried chicken? Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, so I will start my 3-minute timer by again thanking everybody for being here. I will take a moment of a point of personal privilege. This will be my last collegiate debate. I am actually graduating, so I'm glad that it is in the final round, and hopefully I stand up to that. So, right out of the gate, we're going to provide a little bit of refutation. We're going to restate our contentions, and judges, I'm going to give you 4 voters. So, refutation, we talked about mental health. It's just a part of it. So my question is, given the weighing mechanism that we are dealing with here, does cable news cause more harm to mental health than good to mental health? That is the only question you have to answer when it comes to mental health. Okay, so the idea that this is the only way the population would be stumbling around illiterate back in the dark ages without cable news. There are other forms of news. Cable news has not always existed. Democracy has thrived through all of that time that cable news did not exist. And I would remind you again, Judge, we are talking about cable news specifically, not the press, 24-hour U.S. cable news, as defined in my very first constructive. So, to restate our contentions, number 1, the focus of the news is negative. Number 2, it is polarizing. Number 3, it is damaging to both mental and physical health. So right into voters. Number 1 voter is going to be the weighing mechanism of this round. The weighing mechanism of this round is on balance. Does it create more harm than good? Specifically to the topics of polarization and mental health. Does it create more harm than good? It is my burden to show you that more harms are created by cable news than good. It is the negative's burden to show you that more good is created than harms, and the negation has failed to do that. The 2 benefits to cable news that the negation has provided are vital to forensics and for free speech. The connection doesn't even flow because things like emergency broadband and virtual classrooms don't happen over cable news. So those are 2 benefits weighed against all of the harms that I've given you. That is the weighing mechanism. Number 2 is the solvency issue here, right? How does this fix the problem? Cable news does more harm than good, right? I have shown you 17 sources in this fact round, 17 sources that show how much harm cable news does. My opponent has given one source that shows how much good cable news does. Keep that in mind when you're weighing that balance. And lastly, the idea of definitions. My opponent spent an awful lot of time talking about things that were not cable news. We are talking about specifically cable news as defined. Thank you.